Good morning, Discovery. All right, so if somebody were to ask you, what does God look like? What is God like? What would be your answer? What would you tell them if somebody came up to you and they said, what is God like? Never met him. What's God like? What would your answer be? I was thinking about that this week because my view of God has changed quite a bit in my life. I grew up in a very conservative Lutheran denomination, and I spent a lot of time with Luther's small catechism. And so the God that I grew up with, that it was in my head, was a God of rules. He was a God of do's and do nots. I don't know if that was intentional or not. That was my takeaway. The one thing that stuck with me is at the end of the Ten Commandments, which is the first thing in Luther's Small Catechism, he gives you the close of the Ten Commandments. And it is a verse from the Old Testament. And it says this, I, the Lord, am the jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers for generations that hate me and showing them. I visit the iniquity of the fathers upon the children unto the third and fourth generation of those who hate me. And then there's a little explanation. What does that mean? God threatens to punish all those who transgress his commandments. So the problem with this, and maybe as your teaching pastor, this is not something I should confess from the pulpit, so I apologize to the elders in advance. I am not a good rule follower. So to me, I want to ask questions. Like, you give me the rule, I want to know what the loophole is or where I can find it. If you tell me that these are the things I have to do, then I'm thinking about, well, how is that written? Like, what was the actual intent behind the rule? Is there a way that I can get around that? Can I honor the intent of the rule without actually following the rule? Yeah. So that's going to come into play in just a second here. So speaking of following the rules, so when Brian and I got together and Rachel and we started planning this summer sermon series on Jesus encounters, the idea or the rule was that we were going to look at one encounter of Jesus each and every week. Just so you know, you've already heard I'm not a good rule follower. So today we're doing two. We're going to look at two separate encounters because I couldn't just do one. I still think that I'm in the spirit of the rule, so there you go. Think of it, if you want, like August has started here in Minnesota, so back to school sales have started. Think of it as your weekly 2-for-1 deal. Buy one, get one free. And I just want you to know, in the middle of this, since if your attention span is like mine, you're going to need a break in between first message and second message. So we are going to have a little game for one of you. So when we get to that point, the first person to get up here to the microphone, first, don't hurt each other, please. First person to get up to the microphone and give me the correct answer is going to get a prize. It is actually lunch on me. Okay. So let's go to message number one. Message number one is entitled, Lord of the Sabbath. And we're just going to jump right in. Both of these messages, by the way, come from Mark chapter 2 and then into Mark chapter 3. One Sabbath, Jesus was going through the grain fields, and his disciples walked along, and they began to pick some heads of grain. The Pharisees said to Jesus, "Look, why are your disciples doing what is unlawful on the Sabbath?" Jesus answered, "Have you never read what David did when he and his companions were hungry and in need? In the days of Abiathar, the high priest, David entered the house of God, and he ate the consecrated bread, which is lawful only for the priest to eat. And David also gave some to his companions." And then Jesus has this perplexing line. Jesus said to them, "The Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. So the Son of Man is Lord of even the Sabbath." All right, so the Sabbath is not something that we generally talk about in Christianity, so we're going to go and we're going to look at the Sabbath. So first thing here is the Sabbath is a day of rest, it's a day of remembrance, it's a day of reflection. It is also one of the Big Ten, not the Big Ten like the football, the Big Ten like the commandments, right? So it is remember the Sabbath day and to keep it holy. So the Sabbath literally just means rest. It is a day of rest. It was the Jewish seventh day of the week. It is set apart for worship and rest. It was a holy day in Jerusalem, and it was one that made the Israelites stand out amongst all of their neighbors. So God commands his people not to do any work, and he gets explicit in the book of Deuteronomy. He says, you are not to do work, your parents are not to do work, the children are not, the servants are not, the ox, the donkey, or any other animal, even a foreigner who is residing in your town or in your camp should not work on the Sabbath. So the Sabbath day is really one of the signs of the covenant. In the book of Exodus, it says that because of the Sabbath day, this day of rest, it's going to be a sign of my covenant with you forever. As a reminder, as a reminder that God is creator, in the book of Exodus, it also says that we are resting on the seventh day because in 6 days God created the world, and then on the seventh day he rested. In his commentary on this verse, Bishop N.T. Wright writes this. He says, the Sabbath was one of the things that marked out the Jews over the centuries from their pagan neighbors. One of the things that reminded them that they were God's people. It wasn't an odd moral commandment which people observed to earn merit or favor. It was a sign that they belonged to the one true God, the creator of the world, who himself had rested on the seventh day. Now, one of the characters, I hate to call them characters, but this is a work of literature. One of the characters we're about to meet is the Pharisees, right? So the Pharisees are out in the fields walking with Jesus. So depending on how far you walked, by the way, on the Sabbath day, if you went over a half a mile, roughly, that was considered work on the Sabbath. So working on the Sabbath by walking, if you go more than a half mile out of town, that could be work. Certainly picking the grain was considered work. I guess following people who are walking on the Sabbath and criticizing them for not following the law is not considered work, because the Pharisees are walking along with Jesus, and they were the unofficial party that had been the religious and political pressure keepers, timekeepers, rule followers for about 200 years by the time we get to Jesus. Some of them were very devout and holy. Some of them were a little bit nosy, like that neighbor that maybe you have. But they were the self-appointed guardians to make sure that people were following the rules. And they get a little bit of a bad rap in the New Testament because they followed Jesus very closely, because Jesus, over and over and over again, was challenging the status quo and the rules. And one of the things that we learn from Jesus here is this, that the Sabbath day is a gift, not a burden. The Sabbath is intended as a gift from God, not as a burden to be placed. So when Jesus says the Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath, he says that the Sabbath was created for man, not man for the Sabbath. So here's the thing. When the rule is more work to follow than following the rule, there might be a problem. So think about this. So the rules in the Bible, I gave them to you. Everyone's included on the Sabbath day. You're not supposed to work. That includes servants and animals. So if you've got an occupation, you were supposed to take the day off. And then the Bible says that you are not to kindle a fire. You're not to gather manna or wood. And that's really all of the rules that they give us. But then we added on top of that lots of other rules. So the Jews, to avoid breaking those rules, added rules on top of the rules. And there were 39 categories of labor that were forbidden on the Sabbath. Those got broken down, those 39 categories, into further rules. So one of the rules was you couldn't plow or plant on the Sabbath because that would be considered work. But they went a little bit further. If you spit on the dirt and it turned up the dirt, then that would be considered work on the Sabbath. So be careful when and where you're spitting. You are prohibited from hunting on the Sabbath, so don't go somewhere where there are a lot of flies, because if you swat a fly, that could be considered hunting flies. If you create anything permanent, like a writing or a drawing, it could be a form of work. So if you are taking notes right now, just know that technically you are breaking the Sabbath. If you are trying to get something out of your teeth and you take a toothpick and you throw it into the fire that somebody else kindled thinking this is a good thing, that actually you're burning and stoking the fire, so that could be considered work on the Sabbath. So could striking a match, lighting a stove, all forms of work. For the musicians, I'm sorry if you did not get here last night and tune your instruments. Tuning your instruments is forbidden on the Sabbath because it would be a form of work. If you tear something, that could be a form of work if you do it on purpose. If you do it on accident, just know that if you sew it back together, that is a form of work not allowed on the Sabbath. And then for those of you who had a hard time getting out of bed this morning, hopefully your coffee was pre-ground, because grinding the coffee before making the coffee would both be considered work on the Sabbath. So, on and on these rules go, right? And so the Pharisees were trying to protect the Sabbath because that was one of the markers. And then Jesus comes along and he says, wait a minute, I am Lord of the Sabbath. And I love the way that Jesus is talking about this, because he says that the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. And then he gives this let's go to the next one, please. He gives I didn't put the next one up there. So Jesus is Lord. And one of the things that he tells us is that he is the Son of Man. So just a quick history lesson. Back in Jesus' day, they had scrolls for the Old Testament, right? So you could go to the book of Daniel, you could go to the book of Job. What they didn't have is they didn't have all of the clever verses and lines that we have today. So you could not say to somebody, go to chapter 6, verse 3, because chapter 3, verse 6 did not exist. So how you would reference things that were going on is you would just use some key phrases that people would remember or people would know. So when you said something like, the Son of Man is Lord of even the Sabbath, or so the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath, that phrase, Son of Man, meant something specific to the first century people who were hearing it, because this is an oral culture. And if you go back to Daniel chapter 7, this is where the Son of Man is referenced. So the Son of Man is this: I saw in the night visions, this is Daniel prophesying, and behold, with the clouds of heaven there came one like a son of man, and he came to the Ancient of Days, which is another term for God. So he's standing before God, and he was presented before him, and to him was given dominion and glory and kingdom, that all peoples, nations, languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion and shall not pass away. His kingdom is one that will never be destroyed. So the Pharisees come to Jesus and they say, why are your disciples not following the Sabbath? They're picking grain. They're walking through the fields. Why are they not following the Sabbath? And notice Jesus doesn't say, well, yes, we are. He doesn't dispute that. What he says to them is he tells them this old story. He's like, do you remember David? And when David had been anointed king of Israel, but he had not yet been king because Saul was king, Saul was trying to kill him. And so he went into the temple and he ate the consecrated bread, which is illegal. Shouldn't have done it. But he did, because those were extraordinary circumstances. Jesus says these are extraordinary circumstances right now, because the Son of Man is here. The Son of God is here. He is here with you, and you all are missing it. And then he goes on to say the Sabbath was made for humans, not humans for the Sabbath. You're going through all of these hoops to follow all of these rules, but you're missing the point. The Sabbath is about having a relationship with God. It's about having time to reflect, to be part of his kingdom, not to be picking on your neighbors about what they did or did not do. So Jesus doesn't deny what he's doing. Instead, he just says, there's a reason I'm not following the law. He says, essentially, I'm the new David. I have been anointed king. I have come to establish God's kingdom here on earth. I have come that his will might be done here like it is on earth. I'm the Son of Man, chosen by God to establish his kingdom for all nations, all people, all time. So get on board. Can you see why Jesus drove the Pharisees crazy? Because they were the ones who were trying to follow the rules and make sure everybody else followed the rules. And then along comes Jesus and he said, no. The point of the rules is God. It's love God, love others. That's the point of the rules. If you want to follow the rules, let's follow that. See, when we follow the rules, when we do that in love, it stands out. So we talked about this a little bit last week, and I think it's worth repeating. You can speak truth because truth changes lives. Truth changes people's lives. But when we speak truth, when we do truth, we can do it one of two ways. So you can speak the truth in love, which will change somebody's life for all eternity, or you can just speak truth in bitter honesty. Right? Like I've had both truths spoken to me in my life. I'm sure you have as well. What we do is not the only thing that matters. How we do what we do matters. As followers of Jesus, how we say what we say, how we do what we do matters. See, because you can technically follow the rules and not do it in love. Okay. We're going to pause there, and then we're going to look at the next one, because the next message is the law is love. But this is your intermission time, so get prepared if you want to try and come up here for a chance to win a gift card to a local national restaurant chain. All right, so this is going to be a game of Are You Chicken? This is going to require just a little bit of speed because you got to be the first one to the microphone with the correct answer. So get ready. I mean, if you were like at the end of a row, you're not at the end of the row, you might want to get to the end of the row now so you can get up here. You also have to be willing to embarrass yourself publicly just a little bit for whoever's here. And, I mean, it's lunch for one. Just not today, because the restaurant chain that this is for is not open on Sundays. All right, so you have to be the first one up here with the correct answer. So I'm going to give you the question right now. First one up here with the correct answer and a willingness to do an impression of the animal that this chain represents gets the gift card. So, first person on stage to name, with the microphone, to name the popular restaurant chain in the United States that loses an estimated $1 billion a year in annual sales by closing all of their over 3,000 restaurants every Sunday. Wow. It is, in fact, Chick-fil-A. But before I can give you this, you need to do an impersonation of the animal at the restaurant. All right, so I have a Bible verse that comes to mind right now. So when Jesus gets baptized, God says, "This is my son in whom I'm well pleased." Yeah. Genetics and environment. He didn't stand a chance. I'm sorry. All right, so the whole point of that is just that Chick-fil-A closes every Sunday. It stands out. Whatever else you think of the restaurant or what they do, if you go to their corporate website, they say we are going to be closed on Sunday to give all of our employees a day off, a time that they can rest and spend with families. When you do that in love, it stands out. All right, so in the first part of the first message, we looked at the Sabbath being a day of rest and remembrance and reflections. We looked at the fact that the Pharisees are the self-appointed guardians, and the Sabbath was created as a gift, not a burden, and Jesus is Lord of the Sabbath. And then Matthew goes right from that into this next story. So I want to go right into that next story. So chapter 3 starts with this. Another time, Jesus went into the synagogue, and a man with a shriveled hand was there. Some of them were looking for a reason to accuse Jesus, so they watched him closely to see if he would heal him on the Sabbath. Jesus said to the man with the shriveled hand, "Stand up in front of everyone." And then Jesus asked them being the Pharisees, "Which is lawful on the Sabbath, to do good or to do evil, to save a life or to kill?" But the Pharisees remained silent. Jesus looked around at them in anger and, deeply disturbed at their stubborn hearts, said to the man, "Stretch out your hand." And he stretched it out, and his hand was completely restored. Then the Pharisees went out and began to plot with the Herodians on how they might kill Jesus. All right, so a couple things that I want to pull out of this, and then I'll give you my final thought for the day, is this. So Jewish tradition said that you could give aid to somebody on the Sabbath if their life was in danger. Jesus takes that a little bit further, and he's like, no. We are not going to talk about the specifics of the law, which says do no work. We're going to talk about the point of the law, which is love. The point of the law, the point of honoring the Sabbath, is to renew your connection with God. So Jesus asked them, what is more lawful? What is lawful to do on the Sabbath? Can you do good on the Sabbath? Or is it okay to do evil on the Sabbath? The answer, of course, is to do good, not evil. And it's interesting, Jesus heals. The Pharisees are so annoyed by him doing good on the Sabbath, what do? They go out and they plot with the Herodians. And if you don't know the power structure then, the Pharisees really didn't have power. They were the self-appointed guardians, so they went to the followers of Herod. So the Herodians, they were in partnership with the Romans. So Herod managed to keep a semblance of a throne by partnering with the Romans. The Pharisees hated the Herodians at the time because they thought that they had sold out the nation of Judah. They had sold out the people. They were in league with the Romans. But if they could get rid of Jesus by partnering with them, they did. So on the Sabbath, God says, this is the day for you to be holy. This is the day for you to honor me. This is the day for you to be with family. This is the day for you to remember what I did for you. And what do? The Pharisees, they plot to kill someone. I guess that's the answer for them, right? It's not about doing good. It's about following the rule to the letter of the law. So why does Jesus go on this crusade against the Pharisees, and why does he use the Sabbath? And I think N.T. Wright has some really insightful thoughts on this. See, the Sabbath day was a day set aside for Israel, and they stood out from their neighbors because they wouldn't work on the seventh day. They always took the Sabbath off. But then over time, they added rules upon rules, and the Sabbath, rather than having them stand out, became a symbol of exclusivity and superiority. Look at us. Look at how good we are at honoring the Sabbath. You were not honoring the Sabbath the way I am honoring the Sabbath. If you were a good Jew, you would be doing what I am doing. Therefore, you are not. It became an exclusivity. It became a contest. It became a way of standing out both with the Jews and the non-Jews. The Sabbath no longer became part of that mission to be the light to the world. It became a way to say we are better than you, we are chosen, you are not. Jesus is not casting judgment on the Sabbath. He is casting judgment on the hard-hearted people that turned it into something that it was never intended to be. We talked about this last week, and it bears repeating here. God's law is not a weapon. The purpose of the law is to love God, love others. That's what this catechism boils down to. Love God, love others. It's not a set of rules and you've got to follow exactly. It is about loving God, loving others. The law is love. That's what our memory verse is for this week. If you can go to the next slide. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment, and the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. And I love the way that Matthew puts it, so I used his version rather than Mark's. All of the law and all of the prophets hang on these two commandments. When Jesus was asked, what's the first and greatest commandment, he gave them a buy one, get one free. See, me breaking the rules that we came up with is biblical after all. Buy one, get one free, because he was asked, what is the first and greatest commandment? Jesus gave them two, love God, love others. That's what it all boils down to. When Jesus is healing on the Sabbath, he is healing, he is showing mercy, he is showing grace. I think it's interesting in these two stories, and I didn't do it on purpose. This just occurred to me when I was working through this message. Last week, we talked about the woman who had been caught in adultery, and the Pharisees drag this woman in front of everybody and have her stand in front of Jesus. In this story, Jesus has the man with the crippled hand stand up in front of him. But notice the difference. The Pharisees have the woman stand up in condemnation and shame. Jesus has this man stand up in front of him to show the love and mercy of God. Jesus heals on the Sabbath. Jesus forgives the woman. And then it occurred to me, so here's my last thought. Every single one of us is going to stand before God. There will come a day when every single one of us will stand before God. I don't know about you. I am not going to rest on what I have done because, as I pointed out, I'm not so much of a rule follower as a rule kind of follower. In the book of Romans, it says, "Why do you pass judgment on your brother, or do you despise your brother? For we will all stand before the judgment seat of Christ." So, here's what I want to encourage you this week. As we go through this week, we have been doing challenges each and every week. Are there ways in which I put commitment to the rules before relationship with God and others? So in other words, the things that I'm doing and the reasons that I'm doing them, is it following the spirit of the law, which is love? I want you to think about that. And then I want you to think about this. God created a day for us to rest. We need rest. We need to unplug. We need to get away from work, from other things. So are you making time for rest and reflection and relationship? Is your calendar so busy that you don't have room for rest and reflection and relationship? You need to build those things in to your schedule. We don't have to keep the Sabbath anymore as a sign, but we should have a Sabbath. We should have a time that we can get away, we can unplug, and work on our relationship with God and others. Will you stand and pray with me? Lord God, you gave us a set of rules not to show that you are an angry and vengeful God, but to show your love for us. Because when we put you first, when we get our life, our value from you and you alone, it frees us from so many things, from shame, from guilt, from worry. When we can focus on you, when we can get life from you, then we can give life to those around us. We can love like you loved us. So God, I pray that we would focus on you and who you are, that we would set a time aside every day, every week, to really just love you more, to focus on you, and to draw closer to you. It is in your name that I pray, and all God's people say.